Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. We have a great guest, Steve Scalise. How are you, sir?
Mark, I'm doing great. Good to be with you.
Majority whip, soon to be minority whip, unfortunately. I want to cover two areas with you. One is obviously what happened to you. The American people are intensely interested in this and really united around you when you were almost mortally wounded. And also some policy questions. What happened in the Republican Congress, in the House, what's going to happen in the Democrat House, and how, being in the minority, how you think you're going to deal with it. But first, you have a new book in Back in the Game, One Gunman, Countless Heroes in the Fight for My Life. We know the basic story, but let me ask you a question. This guy fires off a round. Bullets how big?
.762 caliber.
A big bullet.
Big bullet.
Okay. You're hit. Walk us through that, the moment you were hit, what you thought, if you felt it, what was going through your mind, were you conscious and so forth?
Well, initially I was stunned because we're on a baseball field. You're not thinking about gunfire. But as soon as I was hit, I went down and my legs gave out. And I could hear more gunfire. So I knew what was going on, but you're still trying to process everything. And so the first thing I'm thinking, I never saw the shooter, but I could hear where the fire was coming from. It was around third base, and I'm playing second. So I start just crawling away. I start crawling to the outfield to get away from.
Are you in pain then?
The gunfire. I'm in almost like a numbness, and I'm not feeling the true pain that I probably should have felt because knowing what that bullet did, the massive internal damage, I didn't quite feel all of that. I'm just kind of in a numbness trying to get away. So I crawled probably about 20 feet, and then my arms gave out. In fact, in the book we have a picture of a blood trail that somebody took that shows you how far I crawled before ultimately my arms gave out. And then at that moment, I just started to pray. First thing that came to mind, I said, I'm just going to pray and put it in God's hands. And believe me, God performed miracles that day, but he gave me an unbelievable sense of calm. Once I started praying, it was almost like everything around me just kind of went into a background noise, and I'm just in a one-on-one conversation with God at that point.
You found peace?
True peace.
How did you get from the baseball field to the transport to get you to the hospital, and were you conscious during most of that?
Well, right after the shooter went down, and to me it seemed like an hour. It was maybe a matter of 7 minutes that the whole shootout happened. And as soon as the shooter went down, Brad Wenstrup, a colleague of mine from Ohio, and he's a doctor, but he's also he was a combat surgeon in Iraq. And he was watching me the whole time, and he immediately came over and looked at where the damage was, put a tourniquet on to stop the bleeding. And my trauma surgeon told me later I wouldn't have made it to the hospital if not for that, for what Brad did. And then there was a few minutes of everybody, colleagues of mine, kind of coming around tending to me. And then an ambulance finally got there, and they transferred me initially to an ambulance. That's kind of when I started to go out, to kind of fade out. And then at some point, the ambulance is leaving, sees a helicopter coming, and it's 7:30 in the morning in Northern Virginia. As you know, I would have never made it to George Washington Hospital, which is where they were going to take me. I would have bled out. So then they go to where the helicopter is landing on the ball field, and sure enough, the helicopter had come to transport me away, and they put me on that helicopter, and 4 minutes later, I'm in the emergency room over at MedStar Hospital. And again, I kind of was out and unconscious by the time I got on the helicopter, but I was starting to fade prior to that, wondering, am I even going to make it?
How many operations have you gone through?
Gone through nine different major surgeries. Luckily, all of them are over and successful at putting everything back together. But it was a lot. Initially just the going in to try to figure out, opened me up to try to figure out where all the damage was, and I had massive internal bleeding. I actually showed up at the hospital with a 0 blood pressure, which rarely does anybody make it out from that. And then they had to put about 20 pints of blood in me, and the human body takes about 9 pints of blood. So I had lost a lot of blood, and then even as they were putting more in, had so many arteries that were shredded. So they finally sewed up each one individually and got me to a point where they could close me up again. And then over the next few months had to put me back together.
What is the first thing you remember when you did come to? Do you remember that?
Yeah, when I came to, it was 3 days later. I didn't know. For all I knew, it was maybe a few hours later. And I had no idea how bad off I was. I remember when I came to that I was shot, and the first thing I did was ask for my wife. And Jennifer had Of course, she had flown in that night, but she was there, and so she sees me, and I've got tubes in my throat, and I've got all kind of other things hooked up to me, so I couldn't even talk. And so I'm trying to make some verbal signals to her, and luckily she knew what I was motioning, and initially what I wanted to find out was Dave and Crystal, my two Capitol Police Security Detail officers that were there with me that morning. I knew both of them were shot in the shootout. And you talk about real heroes, and look, Mark, I identify in the book a lot of miracles that happened, but also the heroes that played a role in saving me, and no bigger heroes than Dave Bailey and Crystal Griner, who both risked their life, were shot at during the shootout, and kept going after the shooter until they took him down. And I didn't know if they made it, and because I knew they were hit. And when Jennifer told me they were both okay, it was just a huge sense of relief.
Were you a man of faith before as well as after?
Yeah, I didn't express it a lot. You know, every night when I go to sleep, I always had a habit of praying to God. You know, I just talk to him about the things that happened, thank him for the things that happened that were good. You know, there might be something you want or something you're trying to achieve down the road, and so you know, I'd pray for those things, but I'd also try to remember to pray and thank him for the things that he did that were good that day. And it's always a constant reminder that every day in life something good happens and bad happens. Don't just focus on the negative. And so I'd always say a quiet, private prayer. But you know, I said some real heady prayers that day on the ball field, and he delivered.
Do you still go through a lot of physical therapy, I imagine?
I do. I still go a few days a week. It's primarily to build up the strength in my left leg. The bullet went in here and did a lot of internal damage, but especially the nerves and muscles on the left side of my leg, you know, took the most, kind of the most damage. And so I'm still building those muscles back. I'm down to one crutch. I initially was on a scooter to get around, and then was able to go on to two crutches, and built enough strength up to go down now to one crutch, and my next goal is to finally be able to walk again without crutches.
Do you feel like you have a renewed purpose because you are a man who shouldn't even be here? I mean, a bullet that big, cutting through your body like that into all those organs, in a place where it's very difficult to get to a hospital. Do you feel like you have a renewed purpose, a renewed life?
You know, I know how close I was, Mark, to not being here. You know, my trauma surgeon, about 2 months after the shooting, I was still in the hospital, and, you know, well enough to where I was on the road to recovery, but still had a lot of damage. And I asked him just how bad it was, and he walked me through, and he said really that first night, he said there were at least 2 different times that first night where he wasn't sure I was going to make it. So I know I'm lucky to be alive. If anything, it puts a real renewed focus on what's important in life. You know, all of us have things that we do every day, and, you know, you're following somebody else's schedule on certain things, and then there's the things you really want to do. And I've tried to remove some of the clutter in my life and focus on the things that really matter to me, which is, you know, my faith and my family and the things I love doing. And I love this job. I love being able to serve and fight for them.
I mean, you were almost assassinated.
Yeah.
You were a political target. You were on a list. This killer, would-be killer, was a radical. He came to Washington with his list. He came here to shoot all you guys. And yet, when you were shot, the nation, I'm sure you know now, everybody was stunned. And then a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, a year goes by, and we're at it again, at each other's throats. Things are said about the president. Things are said that you really wonder with the tone. I'm not saying aggressive political debate, but when you're calling somebody Hitler and a racist and Nazis and stuff like that, isn't that playing with fire?
Yeah, I do think that rhetoric needs to come down, and you know, we all ought to be able to disagree with each other, and where we have a political debate, you ought to fight for the things you believe in because they're critically important. You ought to respect that somebody else that's having a different viewpoint. It doesn't mean that they're evil or that they have ulterior motives. It's just maybe they just see the world differently. But you shouldn't try to make those differences personal. And I do think we've gotten to a point where it's definitely ratcheted up to a point where I think we need to try to calm it down. And you know,
it seems to me when somebody calls somebody Hitler, well, we know what Hitler was, or a racist. In other words, it's not, you know, I disagree with this guy, as you point out, this guy, he's way too to the right or something. But you're using characterizations that you intend to be provocative after this assassination attempt on you, that this is utterly and completely irresponsible to me. And I'm just telling you, Congressman, I turn on the TV, I see this all the time. You see it too, right?
Yeah, you know, and I mean, like you said, I mean, when you're using something that radioactive, I mean, Hitler's a man who literally killed millions of Jews based on the fact that he wanted to annihilate them all from the face of the earth. I mean, that is as pure of evil as you can get, and nobody should be compared to him. But at the same time, you know, you see that they almost seem to try to desensitize it, as if you disagree, it's okay to call somebody something that evil these days. And we all ought to be standing up against that and saying, hold on a second, look, if we disagree, let's at least be honest about why we disagree and try to win the argument. You know, Margaret Thatcher said, you know, first win the debate, then win the vote, which means if you're losing the debate, you don't go and threaten the other person physically or try to call them a racist or a Nazi. You try to maybe make a better argument. And these days it almost seems like the cop-out is just go say something so vitriolic that you try to shut down the debate. And you see this on a lot of college campuses too, where they literally don't want conservative viewpoints. If you're, you know, try going to Berkeley as a conservative. I mean, is that really what you're supposed to be about? Shouldn't you try to say, look, go educate yourself. Let's hear all viewpoints and have enough confidence in your argument that you're going to win the day. But if you're so afraid of the other side's argument that you want to call them names to the point where you shut them down, I think you've already lost.
Did Bernie Sanders ever call you or ever bump into you in the Capitol building, give you a pat on the shoulder or anything like that?
He reached out to my office, and I think we may have spoken in those kind of first few days when I was in a fog, but okay. He did reach out.
Okay. So you guys are going to...
And I don't hold him or
no, of course not.
Anything responsible, because, you know, clearly what this guy did was deranged, and, you know, there's no justification for it.
Let me ask you this. You're going to be in the minority now. But let me talk a little bit about when, like now, you're in the majority, but it's a lame duck session. It's a lame duck session, but things can still get done, right?
Yeah.
Are they going to get done? The border wall.
We're in a battle right now over proper funding of the border wall. I was just in a meeting with President Trump a few days ago. Clearly, this has been a big priority of his. It's a big priority of mine. I'd like to see us get this done, and we're in a fight with the other side. But at the same time, when you look at this caravan coming across, you have in this caravan of people who have said, we're going to ignore your laws and just storm across the border. There are over 600 already known criminal convicts in the caravan. When you look at some of the things they do to try to use women as human shields, again, it shows you what kind of people are really responsible for the caravan. But it's incredibly important that we secure our border, and I applaud President Trump for being willing to do it, because, look, every single day, this doesn't get mainstream media coverage, and it should. Every single day in this country, at least 10 known terrorists are captured trying to cross into America through our border. Why are we trying to secure the border? To keep America safe. And it's not that everybody that comes here wants to seek the American dream. There's a legal way to do that. And President Trump has said, even if you want to seek asylum, seek it the legal way. But if you're trying to break our laws and come over here when the president's saying we're going to secure the border, there's a reason. He's fighting to keep this country safe, because there really are bad people that try to come here.
I'm going to ask you two follow-ups on that. Number one, if there are 10 terrorists captured every day, then why wouldn't the Democrat Party want to do more to help secure that southern border? And number two, is the problem only the Democrats, or are there problems among the Republicans too to get this sort of thing done? Congressman Steve Scalise, so you mentioned that 10 captures a day of potential terrorists on the southern border. Well, why wouldn't that compel the Democrat Party to be a little bit more supportive of building physical barriers on that southern border where we think we can build them?
I mean, it's a good question, but it shows you there is a different mindset on the left. I mean, they truly believe in open borders. You know, this whole idea that just people want to come in, let them come on in. Again, you can look at real numbers to know there is a legal way to come here. By the way, Mark, we are the most generous nation in the world. Anybody that thinks we don't let people into our country, we let 1 million people into our country legally every single year. By far the most generous in the world. We have nothing to be ashamed of. No country's close to us. And by the way, those other countries have their own border protection. So good luck trying to walk into their country illegally. So what we say is there's a way to come here legally. We ought to reform, by the way. There's parts of that legal system that are very broken. But at the same time, we do know that there are bad people that try to come here. And it's well documented. And so if you want to come here legally, there's a legal way to come here. And there are people, by the way, that have been waiting years, 10, 15 years in some cases, to come to America. So what does it say if you're okay with letting somebody jump ahead of them in line? What are you telling those people that have done it the right way, that have played by the rules?
But when you all talk about the law and the rules, it's like they're not particularly interested in the law and the rules, and they must think that it helps the Democrat Party. And in fact, it appears to help the Democrat Party. You have red states going purple, purple states going blue, because the Democrats would not be supporting open borders if they thought Republicans were pouring over the border. So that's a difficult mentality to deal with. But isn't there a problem even within your Republican caucus? I mean, don't you have a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen Republicans who really are not necessarily that supportive of securing the border, or at least securing it in a way that matters?
Well, you know, we don't have a consensus completely about how to properly secure the border. Most of our members have voted in one way or another to secure the border, which includes building the wall. The difference is that you just have no support, not one Democrat. We brought 2 different bills on the House floor in the last few months to secure the border. We had over 220 Republicans voted yes. Not one Democrat voted yes. And so clearly the mentality on the other side is not to support securing the border. A lot of people talk tough, but when it comes time to actually vote to secure the border, they're not there. And even Americans who aren't maybe where you and I are on immigration law would still say at a minimum secure the border. You know, and what you do with different aspects of immigration policy is one thing, but securing America's border is critical to our national security. Not one Democrat was willing to vote yes.
But here's the problem. You got Republicans out there. You've got the conservative base out there. You've got other people out there. So, okay, we gave the Republicans the House. We know what the Democrats are. We know they don't support securing the border, even though they did 10 years ago. Now they've decided it's not in their best interest. The Republicans can't cobble together the numbers that they need to send the bill to the Senate. True?
Well, not one particular bill. We haven't coalesced around that. And frankly, we've been working with the president on the best way to do it that he would support. Because, you know, the president's looked at a number of different ways on this. The president wants to see the border properly secured and to get the $25 billion. It's not just $5 billion this year we're fighting for. You know, and President Trump's made it clear, at least give me the $5 billion this year to start building the wall out further. It's a long-term project and it costs more money over the next 4 or 5 years. But at least let's start with this. And by the way, when Pelosi had the supermajority in the House and Senate, when they passed Obamacare, they could have done anything they wanted, and they did. They didn't try to go and fix immigration policy. So when they right now try to use the left and use immigration and say, oh, look, you know, the Republicans don't care about you, they didn't care when they had everything. We've actually tried to solve this problem, and not one Democrat stepped up to vote with us. When Pelosi controlled everything last time, she didn't bring a bill to the floor. Not good or bad. We've at least brought bills to the floor.
I just think in diners, in pubs, at kitchen tables all over the country, they're not thinking about what Pelosi did or didn't do. They're saying, okay, we sent the Republicans in, they got a majority, and we got a Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican President. We spend billions and billions of dollars, massive debt, and we can't cobble together $5 billion to try and secure that southern border. I think, yeah.
Mark, let me say this, because first of all, we did put at least $1.5 billion in place. Surely not the $5 billion. There is some wall that's being built. But on top of that, we worked very closely with this president to finally start rebuilding our military after what President Obama did to literally degrade it to the point where last year we lost more men and women in training deaths than in combat by more than a 3-to-1 margin. We also, by the way, got regulations under control. The Obama-era regulations were crushing not just the middle class, they were killing manufacturing in America. We've completely reversed that, working with this president and getting bills to his desk that he signed. The tax cut bill, not one Democrat voted with us, but yet we got a bill. Not since Ronald Reagan in 1986 have we had a tax reform bill get all the way to the president's desk. And this one was incredibly historic. Cut taxes at every single level, made our country competitive again, and we're reaping the rewards. And by the way, the federal government this year took in more money to the Treasury with those tax cuts. For those people that would say tax cuts equal deficits, we took in more money this year than we ever have before. Obviously, we've got to get control over the mandatory side of spending, but we've gotten our economy back on track. We're finally seeing economic growth, and we've rebuilt our military while getting regulations under control. Those are important things. There are definitely things that we haven't done, and it's fair criticism to say, okay, you didn't do this on immigration, on Obamacare, you didn't repeal and replace it. We in the House passed the bill with 1 vote to spare to do it. It failed by 1 vote in the Senate. Fair criticism to say those things didn't get done. So there's more work left to do. But clearly when you look at what we've done in the House, working with this president, incredibly historic things for our economy and our military, there's still more work to be done. But watch what Pelosi does when she's Speaker, and I think then people will recognize what the difference is.
I want to ask you about spending. It seems to be out of control. The debt is massive. It's getting bigger and bigger. And in that context, I want to ask you if the House has a good relationship, working relationship, with the Senate Republicans and Mitch McConnell. He's announced over and over again that they will not shut down the government. Now, I was around during the Reagan administration. He shut it down 6 times. Several years ago on my radio show, Paul Ryan said that really when we talk about a government shutdown, we're talking about 17% of the government. The vast majority of government doesn't shut down. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Border Patrol, military, federal police, untouched, and on and on and on. Is this a PR problem? Because it would seem every time the government is, quote unquote, shut down, Republicans do okay. And we just had a midterm election, so there's no election tomorrow. Schumer says, look, the government shuts down, that's on the President of the United States. The President of the United States says, look, I've been asking for this wall money, $5 billion now, every year I've been president, and then I'm stuck with this attack that I'm not holding up my promise, and this year I'm really going to put it to you. Government shutdown, no government shutdown, and whose fault is it?
Well, the president's made it clear that he wants $5 billion for the next year to secure the border. It includes wall funding, but it also includes a lot of other things that the president's been asking for, more technology to make more effective use of our Border Patrol agents, to give them more of the tools they need to be safe in carrying out that mission. Look, we just saw with this caravan, they were trying to attack, and in some cases attacking our Border Patrol agents, throwing rocks, throwing other things at our Border Patrol agents, at law enforcement. And so the threat is real, and the need to secure our nation's borders is real. If Chuck Schumer wants to shut down the government because he doesn't want to secure America's border, that's a fight that he's going to lose. And he's lost one of these shutdowns before. So, at the end of the day, we need to secure our border, and the American people, again, regardless of where you stand on immigration policy, most Americans believe we ought to secure the border.
Does the House Republican leadership get along okay with the Senate Republican leadership? I expect you to say, oh, yeah, it's swell. But is it really swell?
We have different approaches to how we do things. We have different rules. And I've been critical in the past of the 60-vote rule in the Senate, especially on appropriations bills, and they'll say, well, that's Senate policy, that's Senate business. The thing is, we've got so many bills that we've sent over to the Senate that we passed with a majority vote. And by the way, a lot of those were tough votes to pass because not one Democrat would vote with us, and we still got it done. And when not one of those bills can get it through the Senate because of that rule, it really makes it hard for us to follow through on the things we want to see done. But at the end of the day, those are the rules we've got to work with. And so we still can work together to get big things done. And a classic example of that is the tax cut bill.
Now, you said we've had more tax income than ever before in American history with the tax cut. But we're spending more and borrowing more than ever in American history. And people look at this and they say, we're not even making really any progress. It's barely even talked about, even Republicans on Capitol Hill. We hear the Senate say, we have a great bill, we're going to get it passed and on the president's desk. Now, last year when that happened, it was a massive spending bill, but he wanted to protect the Defense Department, which has been, as you said, was eviscerated under Obama. The president shouldn't really be given that choice, should he? Either fund defense or massive new debt. Where is this coming from?
Yeah, Mark, no president and no Congress should be in a position of saying, do you properly fund defense or do you balance the federal budget? It's a false choice. And in fact, one of the very few constitutional responsibilities we have as members of Congress is to fund our national defense. And you've highlighted this so many times, so well over the years, on what the Constitution is really all about. If you look at what's driving our debt, we spend probably 90% of our time talking about the discretionary side of budget, which includes defense. If you eliminated the whole Department of Defense, you'd still have a deficit. So don't act like that's the problem in Washington. 2/3 of our spending in Washington is what's called mandatory spending, things that we don't even vote on. It's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and Obamacare. And think about this. In one bill that we passed to the Senate last year with only a 51 vote requirement, the repeal and replace of Obamacare, we repealed Obamacare, got rid of that, actually put in place reforms to lower premiums, put you in charge of your health care, protected people with pre-existing conditions. We did all of that. And we turned Medicaid, which is one of the most broken forms of health care, we turned Medicaid over to the states to run, and we put Medicaid on a budget. We didn't cut Medicaid spending like Democrats would say. We just slowed the growth. So only in Washington, if you were going to get an 8% increase and you get a 3% increase, you still got an increase and they call it a cut. Just that alone would have saved over $800 billion and improved health care outcomes for families all across the country. Oh, and by the way, Medicare, if we do nothing, if we don't touch it, it's set to go bankrupt in 8 years. I think that would be irresponsible to let it go bust. We have a plan, by the way, to save Medicare from bankruptcy. Democrats don't even want to talk about that, but if you just look at the health care bill alone, 2 of the big 4 mandatory spending programs in one fell swoop, we could have dramatically reformed and helped us get to a balanced federal budget.
You have a plan on Medicare. You guys going to vote on it before you leave town?
I'm not sure if there's going to be a vote on that. I think what we need to do is have a public discussion. We haven't really engaged the American people on what the problem is. I mean, when I go home, I talk to senior groups in New Orleans, and the first thing I say is, how many of you know Medicare goes bankrupt in 8 years? Mark, half the people in the room are scared to even talk about it because they think that they know it's bad. They know it's gone bust. They just think the solution would negatively impact them. And when I say, first of all, our plan doesn't even make any changes to Medicare for you, except that it won't go bust on your watch. Well, immediately they're okay having this conversation. Young people, by the way, don't believe it's going to be there for them. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to have to make some changes to how a 30-year-old will have to, make plans so that they can still have some kind of health care plan for them when they retire, they're open to that discussion too. We can't just assume everybody knows what the problem is. We have to have this discussion and then go talk about what our solution is, because the Democrats don't want to make any changes. They want to let it go bust and scare and frighten seniors. That's all they want. And seniors are tired of being scared on this issue.
So you're saying, and correctly, because I know the trustees put out this report every year for Medicare, Social Security, and so forth, that Medicare goes bust in 8 years.
And it's bipartisan, by the way, Mark.
Bipartisan.
It's not like, this is just what the Republicans said. Both Obama's actuaries and Trump's actuaries on Medicare acknowledge it goes bust. Oh, and by the way, the Democrats' plan of what they call Medicare for All.
Medicare for All with bankrupt health insurance for all.
It bankrupts Medicare even faster because you take a plan that's right now insolvent. It should be shored up. We need to save it from bankruptcy. Right. Again, we have a plan to save it from bankruptcy. They put 200 million more people on a plan that's going bankrupt, so it goes bankrupt faster. Seniors don't want that. And oh, by the way, the Democrats' plan also eliminates private health insurance that you get through your company, which, by the way, most people who get private health insurance get it through their employer, and they like that health care.
Steve Scalise, let's talk about the Democrats for a minute. You're going to be in the minority. It's not a massive majority the Democrats will have, but big enough. The committees are represented mostly by one coast or the other coast. San Francisco's well represented, New York City's well represented, Baltimore and so forth. Got a big center of the country that really isn't represented by a lot of these chairmen of these various committees. And they've made it abundantly clear that they have as their purpose to expand the welfare state, to drive up the debt further, to drive up spending further, and to drive this president from office. Is the Republican caucus ready to really duke it out?
We're ready to go to battle. And look, this is a battle for the direction of our country and for this president to be able to continue following through on his promises. I think one of the best things about the Trump presidency is that he's actually doing the things he promised he would do during a campaign. That's refreshing. That's also the reason that they hate what he's doing, because he's going after the leftist mentality that they put in place under Barack Obama. And so when you look at what their agenda is, they weren't real clear in a lot of those swing districts, Mark. There's only 3 districts that they flipped that Hillary Clinton won. So the bulk of the Republicans that lost to Democrats that gave Pelosi the majority were in places where Donald Trump actually won when he was on the ballot. And so it's going to be a real delicate balance for them. Their very first vote as a member of Congress is going to be for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. And many of them promised that they wouldn't do it. So eyes are going to be real clearly focused on that very first vote. Did you break your bond to your constituents on day one, but even on day 2 and 3 and 4, when she's bringing radical bill after radical bill to abolish ICE. They want to get rid of our interior border patrol agents. This open border mentality, Medicare for all, where they eliminate private health insurance and help bankrupt Medicare. And then let alone all this personal stuff where they want to keep going after the president and ultimately go to impeachment. As they go down that kind of leftist agenda, that's not where middle America is. That's not where a lot of those seats that they flip from Republican to Democrat are.
Are you guys ready to organize on these committees and battle them inch for inch, territory?
We absolutely need to. Look, I was there on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I had just gotten on the committee as a new member of Congress in 2009 when they started moving through Obamacare. Go look at the popularity of Obamacare at the beginning. When it was introduced, it was very popular. And then ultimately we exposed so many different pieces of that bill that were going to destroy your relationship with your doctor, that were going to jack up the cost of health care. We laid it all out. It wasn't a mystery. And we did that in committee, where the work is actually going to be done, on the House floor, where you've got to do battle, to the point where when the bill passed, it was unpopular with the American people, and it's remained unpopular because it's bad law. But ultimately, we've got to have that kind of same mentality to go and battle them, again, in the marketplace of ideas. Show why their ideas are bad and why we have better ideas.
I just feel in the committees, they seem to strategize together. They seem to be organized. They can be very obnoxious when they want to, and so forth. They obstruct. I'm not saying Republicans should do the same thing, but I just hope they're prepared to organize within each and every one of these committees, because the Democrats in the minority seem to know what to do with the minority. Sometimes the Republicans in the minority don't seem to know what to do in the minority. That would be something that would concern me. So there's at least thought or talk.
Well, it's been, and remember this, it's been 8 years since we've been in the minority. Over 70% of our conference, Republican House members, never served in the minority. So for a lot of people, this is going to be their first experience. And I hope they don't like this experience. I'm not going to like it, because I've seen what it's like when Nancy Pelosi's speaker and the kind of agenda she moves through. Mm-hmm. The difference is now we have a president working with us to help highlight just how radical their agenda is going to be. And we've got to do a better job, Mark, of explaining to the American people what we stand for, and contrast the difference.
No, that's right. Steve Scalise. I mean, we got hit pretty good, the House, in the midterm election. And what was the message? Was there a united message that the House Republicans were running on? Because honestly, I'm not sure.
You know, I think going in, it was clearly the economy. That was the main focus, because the economy is still doing really well. The thing is that wasn't enough. You know, and frankly, the Democrats did a good job of going out and lying, I would argue, and you know, in fact, they were lying about the fact that we were trying to take away pre-existing condition coverage. But that's where they went. They tried to put people on defense, and they had a lot of money behind that too. They heavily outraised us. Their base was very motivated. I'll say this: when the president got engaged, we actually did really well in terms of bringing our base to a higher level of turnout too. And typically an off-year election doesn't do so well on turnout. We saw very high percentage turnout this time around. But ultimately, I do think that our message wasn't sharp enough. It wasn't just enough to be for the economy. I think we should have gotten into a more direct back and forth on health care, because what they said wasn't true. But if you're not out there pushing back, then the myth becomes the fact.
Interestingly, in some of these districts, relatively Republican districts, maybe marginal, where you had candidates running away from the president, many of them got blown out, didn't they?
Well, you know, if you look at, I'll just use the Senate, since some of the House races, you know, can go back and forth. If you look where the president went to flip Democrat seats to Republican, you know, Missouri is a real good example. If you look at what happened in Indiana, North Dakota, I mean, you had a lot of opportunities, or South Dakota, where the president directly got engaged and ultimately flipped a seat from Democrat to Republican, and helped increase turnout at the same time. Even in Texas, you know, he and Ted Cruz didn't necessarily get along with each other during the Republican primaries, but they sure came together. And Senator Cruz voted for Kavanaugh and helped the president get his judge nominees through, and so the president came down and helped support Ted Cruz. You look in Florida, Ron DeSantis, a colleague of mine, wouldn't be governor today if not for the direct involvement over and over of President Trump going down to Florida and also helping Rick Scott along the way. So
what does this tell you?
I still think when the president gets directly involved, he is incredibly popular. You would see, I was in Houston doing some events the day after President Trump came to Houston to do a rally for some of our members down there that were having tough races. They filled the Toyota Center. I mean, there were probably 15,000 people in the arena and another 15,000 outside, knowing they couldn't get in, but just wanted to be there, which tells you the enthusiasm for this president has never been higher. I do think when it comes to 2020 and it's President Trump on the ballot against whatever far left radical they nominate out of their 20, 30 person primary, President Trump's going to do incredibly well because we've got a great economy. I think it's going to keep getting better. And then ultimately you're going to have a contrast that couldn't be clearer, just like President Trump against Hillary Clinton. I think it's going to be a very similar situation in 2 years.
Now, Congressman, your prediction, do you think the Democrats are going to overreach, and will the Republicans be prepared to take advantage of that?
On both fronts, yes. I don't think there's a doubt Nancy Pelosi, her conference will be further to the left in January than when she was Speaker back from 2006 to 2010. You can just see how far left they've moved in that short of a period of time. And so I think there's no way that she avoids overreaching. And again, we have to make that sharp contrast with President Trump on the ballot in 2020. I think he gets reelected and we take the House back.
And isn't your group more conservative now? You've lost a number of these so-called rhinos. And wouldn't she also be laying out there perhaps 36 Democrats who won in relatively Republican districts?
Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities that we're going to have to show the differences, and we need to do that. We need to be ready to, and I think we will be. We have to recruit really good candidates. You can't just run against somebody who's bad. You got to put up a really strong candidate, and I think we'll have a lot of people willing to step up and be a part of retaking the House and working with this president again to keep putting real conservative reforms in place that'll be long-lasting to turn this country around.
So you're telling the Republicans are ready, and they're ready even in the minority.
Yeah, and you know what? If your Republican incumbent was beat by a Democrat and you want to be a part of getting this country back on track, reach out. Reach out to me. Reach out to our team. We need really good people to run for Congress and to go and fight to get this country back on track.
Great pleasure. God bless you.
Great being with you. Thanks.
See you next time on Life, Liberty, and Levin.